Right now, as you're watching this, Russia is running out of money. Not slowly, not gradually, right now. In just the first quarter of 2025, Russia has burned through $25.5 billion, significantly surpassing its planned annual budget. Their war chest has collapsed from $150 billion to just $38 billion. And it's accelerating. Even Maxim Reshetnikov, Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, admitted they're on the brink of transitioning into recession. 73% of Russian companies can't find workers because the military keeps taking them. Inflation is raging at 9.4% despite interest rates that are crushing what's left of the civilian economy. But here's what makes this truly catastrophic. They can't stop. Every day Putin keeps this war going, Russia has to choose: feed the war machine or keep the economy alive. And every single day, they're choosing the war. Defense spending is now consuming 6.3% of their entire economy, the highest since the Soviet era. They're literally cannibalizing their own country to keep fighting. And the collapse isn't coming. It's here. The only question left is how fast it spirals out of control. What happened at Russia's flagship economic forum should have terrified the Kremlin. This is supposed to be their big moment, where they parade economic strength before international investors. Instead, it became a public confession of economic failure. Based on current business sentiment, it seems to me we're on the brink of transitioning into recession, Russian Minister Maxim Reshetnikov declared to a room full of investors expecting celebration, not catastrophe. Elvira Nabiullina, head of Russia's central bank, delivered the knockout blow. We've been growing for 2 years at a fairly high rate due to the fact that free labor resources were used. But we need to understand that many of these resources have really been exhausted. Exhausted. That's the word Putin's own team used to describe their war economy. But here's what makes this admission truly shocking. Other officials immediately tried to contradict their own minister. Finance Minister Sulyunov claimed Russia's economy was merely cooling and that summer always follows cooling. The desperation was obvious. They were spinning an economic disaster as seasonal weather. Russia's GDP growth crashed from 4.5% in the fourth quarter of 2024 to just 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025. After 3 years of pumping massive defense spending, the artificial stimulus is wearing off. Even Putin himself had to acknowledge the crisis, warning that this should not be allowed under any circumstances. When the man who started this war is publicly worried about economic collapse, you know the situation is dire. The war economy that was supposed to make Russia stronger is now choking everything else. Russia ended 2024 with a deficit of $34.4 billion. That alone should have been a red flag. But in just the first quarter of 2025, they've already hit $25.5 billion in deficit spending. They're burning through money faster than a house fire. They originally planned a much smaller deficit for the entire year. Instead, they've already spent 3 times faster than planned, and we're not even halfway through 2025. The National Welfare Fund, Russia's rainy day fund, has been gutted. Before the invasion, $150 billion. Today, $38 billion. Putin has burned through nearly 3/4 of Russia's financial cushion in less than 3 years. Military spending now accounts for $145 billion in 2025 alone, more than Russia spent on defense during the height of the Cold War. But here's what makes this truly insane. They're not just buying weapons. They're paying soldiers $30,000 to $40,000 per contract, funded jointly by federal government, regional authorities, and businesses. That means private companies are being forced to subsidize military recruitment while their own operations collapse from lack of workers and capital. The war machine never stops feeding. Official inflation sits at 9.4%, nearly double what Russia's central bank considers acceptable. But real inflation for ordinary Russians is much higher. Potato prices jumped 173% year on year. A basic borscht index of ingredients has surged 27% in 2025. With wages flat and prices surging, millions are watching their livelihoods disintegrate. Central bank raised interest rates to a crushing 21%, the highest in over 20 years. They've recently cut to 18%, but that's still catastrophically high for any functioning economy. But here's what exposes the complete insanity of Russia's situation. Even with interest rates 2.5 times higher than inflation, prices keep rising. As one Russian steel executive put it, this is a situation probably without precedent in modern world history, when the central bank rate is 2.5 times higher than inflation and it still doesn't slow down. Think about that. Interest rates are so high they would normally crush any economy, and inflation still won't stop. Here's the death spiral. High rates are supposed to cool an overheated economy, but Russia's economy isn't overheated from healthy growth. It's overheated from war spending the government can't reduce. So they're trapped. Keep rates high and crush civilian businesses. Lower rates and watch inflation destroy Russians' purchasing power. Inflation keeps rising, not because demand is strong, but because the government is injecting war money into an economy already gasping for air. The money supply is growing by 20% year on year, from 91 trillion to 109 trillion rubles. Russian companies are confidently borrowing at these insane rates because they either believe inflation will wipe out their debts or they're relying on government contracts and subsidies. Before the invasion, $1 bought about 75 rubles. Today, over 110 rubles per dollar. That's a collapse of about 47%. In the last week of November 2024, the ruble lost 10% of its value in just 2 days. Currency traders called it a panic attack for Russia's currency market. Every time the ruble weakens, imports become more expensive, feeding directly into inflation. Since Russia depends heavily on imported goods, a weak ruble means higher prices for everything. But here's what makes the ruble situation truly catastrophic. Russia can't defend its own currency anymore. The central bank has limited foreign currency reserves to intervene in forex markets. They can't raise interest rates much higher without completely destroying what's left of the civilian economy. And the structural reasons for weaknesses keep getting worse. Russia's trade surplus has been shrinking since the second quarter of 2024. Oil prices have been falling, and the finance ministry has had to lower its forecast for oil revenues in 2025. Here's the cruel mathematics. Every 10% drop in the ruble now adds about 0.5 percentage points to inflation. But with an overheated economy, that effect is even stronger, potentially 0.6 percentage points or more. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians watch their savings evaporate. The currency that was temporarily the world's best performer in early 2025 has become a symbol of economic failure. 73% of Russian companies now report they can't find enough staff. This isn't unemployment, it's a personnel famine spreading across every sector. Where did all the workers go? Mobilized into the military, fled the country to avoid conscription. Hundreds of thousands of educated professionals have left Russia since the invasion. In some regions, there are now 9 job vacancies for every unemployed person. The defense industry, flush with government contracts, poaches workers by offering salaries 50% higher than civilian jobs. Tank factories run 24/7 while civilian companies can't find staff. But here's what makes this truly devastating. It's not just any workers leaving. Over 50,000 IT professionals fled Russia in the first month of the war, the exact people needed to develop technological alternatives to Western imports. Universities struggle to find qualified professors. Research institutions operate with skeleton crews. The wage inflation this creates is staggering. Average wages jumped 19% in 2024 alone. Defense industry firms gave workers 28% raises, then another 12% a few months later. Companies like Uralvagonzavod, the tank manufacturer, are in bidding wars for workers. This creates a runaway chain reaction. War economy sucks up workers, civilian industries can't grow, labor shortages drive up wages, feeding inflation. Russia has resorted to using prison labor. By August 2023, over 26,000 prisoners were working for businesses, almost triple the 2022 number. Major companies like Rostec and Avtovaz now use convict workers. But even that's not enough. Russia is now recruiting workers from Central Asia, but these countries can't provide the trained professionals needed. Moscow's failure to invest in workforce development has left Russian industries completely unprepared. This is economic desperation disguised as policy. The latest U.S. sanctions targeted Gazprombank, one of the last major Russian banks processing international payments. This has cut off Russia's remaining financial lifelines to the global economy. Russian companies now scramble to get paid for exports, often accepting steep discounts or working through complicated payment schemes. The G7 oil price cap continues to squeeze revenues. Russian oil trades at $20 to $30 per barrel below market price. That's billions in lost revenue every month. But here's what makes the sanctions truly devastating now. They're not just hitting oil revenues. Russia's arms exports, once a major source of foreign currency, have collapsed by 92% between 2021 and 2024. Major clients like India have delayed or canceled purchases, turning to other suppliers. This matters because arms exports were supposed to be sanction-proof. Russia's defense industry was designed to earn hard currency and maintain influence globally. Instead, sanctions have crippled even this sector. Over 1,000 Western companies have left Russia, taking jobs, technology, and expertise that can't be replaced. Russia talks about pivoting to Asia, but China and India buy Russian resources only at steep discounts. The technological sanctions are particularly brutal. Russia can't access the semiconductors, industrial equipment, and precision machinery needed for modern manufacturing. Companies are forced to attempt parallel imports via third countries at much higher cost and legal risks. But sanctions weren't just about banks and oil. They have choked off the very lifeblood of Russia's future, technology. Russia is being cut off from the technology it needs for a modern economy. Russian airlines have resorted to cannibalizing grounded planes for spare parts because Boeing and Airbus won't service their aircraft. Industrial plants struggle to maintain equipment without Western replacement parts. The Russian space program is falling behind without international components. Some Russian cars are sold without airbags because necessary components can't be imported. This technological isolation creates a self-reinforcing collapse. Without modern equipment, productivity fails. Without productivity growth, the economy stagnates. Without growth, there's no money to develop domestic alternatives. Russia is experiencing reverse industrialization, moving backward technologically while other countries advance. While the Kremlin focuses on military production, ordinary Russians are bearing the cost of this economic transformation. Teachers, doctors, police officers, and other public sector workers are seeing their real wages eroded by inflation. Their salaries are indexed to official inflation rates of around 9%, but actual price increases they face can be 20% or more. Consumer debt is exploding as Russians borrow more money to maintain their standard of living. Auto loans have increased dramatically, with the average amount of car loans jumping from 1.25 million rubles in December 2022 to 1.51 million rubles in just 1 year. This is creating dangerous social tensions. The same people who are supposed to support Putin's regime, teachers, healthcare workers, civil servants, are watching their living standards collapse while defense workers get massive pay raises. Regional governments are also feeling the squeeze. Moscow has been cutting transfers to regional budgets, forcing local authorities to choose between maintaining basic services and meeting federal demands. Some regions have already started reducing recruitment bonuses for military volunteers, a clear sign that local finances are under severe strain. Here's the cruel irony at the heart of Russia's crisis. The very spending that's supposed to make Russia stronger is actually making it weaker. But this massive military investment is crowding out everything else the economy needs to function. Investment in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and technology development has been slashed to fund weapons production. The 2025 budget sacrifices spending on science and innovation in favor of tanks and ammunition. This creates a fundamental problem. Military spending doesn't create long-term economic value. A tank doesn't generate exports, create jobs in civilian industries, or develop new technologies that can be commercialized. Russia is essentially converting its entire economy into a machine for consuming resources and producing weapons that get destroyed in combat. It's economically equivalent to taking money and setting it on fire. Meanwhile, countries like South Korea, which spend similar amounts on defense, do so in ways that develop advanced technologies and create exportable products. Russia's military-industrial complex, by contrast, produces weapons that can't be sold internationally due to sanctions and often uses outdated technology that offers no civilian applications. What makes Russia's situation truly catastrophic is that they've reached what economists call the point of no return, where the cost of continuing the current path exceeds the cost of stopping, but stopping would require admitting defeat. Every month this war continues, Russia burns through resources it can't replace. The National Welfare Fund will be exhausted by the end year at current spending rates. Foreign currency reserves are frozen by sanctions, and the domestic economy is being hollowed out to feed the military machine. But Putin can't stop without acknowledging that the war has been a strategic failure, so Russia is trapped in an economic death spiral, spending money it doesn't have on a war it can't win to maintain a regime that's destroying the country's future. The mathematical reality is stark. If current trends continue, Russia will face a choice between defaulting on its debts, drastically cutting military spending, or imposing even more draconian economic controls that would essentially return the country to a Soviet-style command economy. So what does Russia's economic collapse mean for the conflict in Ukraine? In the short term, probably not much. Authoritarian regimes can continue functioning even with terrible economic conditions. North Korea has maintained its military for decades despite chronic economic problems. But economics will eventually matter. Military equipment needs to be maintained and replaced. Soldiers need to be paid and equipped. And most importantly, the civilian population needs to maintain enough stability that they don't threaten the regime's survival. Russia's current path is unsustainable. The question isn't whether the economic pressure will eventually force changes in Russian strategy. It's how long Putin can maintain the current trajectory before the economic reality becomes impossible to ignore. Some analysts believe we could see major economic constraints on Russia's military capabilities by late 2025 or early 2026. Others think Russia can muddle through for several more years by further sacrificing civilian living standards. What's clear is that every month this continues, Russia emerges weaker and more isolated, with fewer resources and options for the future. Russia's economic collapse isn't just a regional problem, it has implications that ripple across the global economy. Energy markets remain volatile as Russia struggles to maintain oil and gas production with limited access to Western technology. Food markets are disrupted as both Russia and Ukraine, major grain exporters, redirect resources toward military needs. For the West, Russia's economic weakness creates both opportunities and risks. A weakened Russia is less capable of threatening its neighbors militarily, but economic desperation can also lead to more dangerous and unpredictable behavior. China is watching closely, as a Russian economic collapse would eliminate an important geopolitical partner while potentially creating instability on China's northern border. What we're witnessing isn't just an economic crisis, it's the slow-motion collapse of the economic foundation that has supported Russian power for decades. Russia entered this war believing its economy was strong enough to weather Western sanctions and finance a quick victory. Instead, they've discovered that their economy was far more fragile and dependent on the global system than they realized. Corporate bankruptcies increased 26% in the first 3 quarters of 2024, reaching 6,392 cases. When borrowing costs more than 20%, most businesses can't survive. Construction companies, retail chains, manufacturing firms, they're all being sacrificed to fund the war economy. Meanwhile, defense contractors thrive with unlimited government contracts. This creates a bizarre two-tier economy where weapons manufacturers expand while companies providing value to Russian citizens collapse. But here's what makes this corporate death wave truly catastrophic. It's destroying Russia's future productive capacity. The companies going bankrupt aren't just small businesses, they're firms that provide essential civilian goods and services. Russia's retail car sales collapsed 58.8% in 2022 and have never recovered. Even with Chinese imports, 2023 sales were less than half of 2021 levels. Hundreds of dealerships have closed as demand collapses again in 2025. The automotive example shows how the economic destruction spreads. Western car makers like Renault, Toyota, and Volkswagen exited. Supply chains collapsed. Russian automaker Avtovaz had to sell cars without airbags and ABS systems because they couldn't get parts. Now even domestic car production struggles as workers and materials get diverted to defense industries. It's economic Darwinism in reverse. The least productive parts of the economy survive, while essential civilian industries die. Before we reveal the final, devastating numbers that explain why Russia's collapse may be unstoppable, make sure you're subscribed to Fall of Nations. What we're about to show you explains why some analysts believe a complete economic breakdown could happen before 2026. Russia's working-age population was already shrinking before the war. The conflict has made this catastrophic. Over 800,000 working-age Russians have been killed or wounded in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands more fled to avoid conscription. The ongoing mobilization continues pulling productive workers from the civilian economy. But it's not random workers leaving. Russia is losing its most educated citizens, engineers, programmers, scientists, doctors. Some tech companies report losing 50% of their staff since 2022. But here's what makes this demographic crisis truly unsolvable. Russia's underlying demographics were already catastrophic. Each year, about 1 million people age out of the workforce while fewer people enter it. The war has accelerated this decline dramatically. Migrant workers from Central Asia who traditionally filled labor gaps are now staying away. Migrant inflows have fallen to a 10-year low as workers face a hostile environment and economic instability. The Kremlin has tried raising the retirement age and urging families to have more children, but these are long-term fixes at best. In the short term, Russia faces an acute shortage of working-age people just when the economy needs them most. Even if the war ended tomorrow, it would take decades to rebuild this human capital. Every month the war continues, the demographic hole grows deeper and becomes impossible to fill. All these crises are happening simultaneously and reinforcing each other. Budget deficits force higher taxes, which crush civilian businesses, reducing tax revenue, which worsens deficits. Labor shortages drive up wages, fueling inflation, weakening the ruble, making imports expensive, driving inflation higher. The brain drain reduces innovation and productivity, making Russia less competitive, reducing export revenues, forcing more borrowing. Sanctions reduce technology access, lowering productivity further. At current burn rates, Russia's last financial reserves will vanish by the end of the year. Debt service costs will consume government revenue, and the shrinking economy won't support both massive military spending and basic civilian needs. We are approaching the most dangerous phase, when a failing regime may take the greatest risks. As economic pressure mounts, Putin faces an impossible choice: admit failure and end the war, or double down with even more extreme measures. History shows economically desperate regimes often become more aggressive, not less. The prospect of internal collapse can drive leaders to seek external victories or create foreign crises. This isn't just about economics anymore, it's about stability, security, survival. Russia still possesses nuclear weapons and significant military capabilities. An economically cornered Putin could pose even greater dangers to global stability. The war that was supposed to restore Russian greatness is instead accelerating Russian decline. Every day it continues, Russia becomes poorer, more isolated, and less capable of projecting power globally. The tragic irony is that Putin's attempt to build a Russian empire is systematically destroying the economic foundation that any sustainable Russian power would require. The data we've shown you isn't a speculation. It's documented evidence from Russia's own officials. The collapse is real, it's accelerating, and it may be irreversible. Right now, as you finish watching this, Russia is burning through another few $100 million it can't afford on a war it can't win to maintain an empire it can't sustain. Tomorrow, the bleeding continues. The only question left is how long this economic freefall can continue before reality forces a reckoning that Putin may not be able to control. What do you think? Will Russia's economic crisis finally force an end to this war? Or can authoritarian regimes ignore economic reality longer than we expect? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations for more analysis of how economic forces are reshaping global power.